Thanks, first of all, to the Irish Council Social Housing for putting on the event. Clearly, they've succeeded really in tapping into an area that's of considerable interest. There's a great attendance here today. So, and thanks to them for inviting us to participate as well from the department's point of view. As Karen said, I work with the department's what we call the Housing Capital Programmes side, and myself and the team that work with me are based in the department's office in Ballina, Mayo. We have responsibility for the oversight of CAS, as well as, I'd also personally be involved in all local authority build and buy activity in terms of social housing delivery. That's capital funded as well. So that's, to be fair, probably, the lion's share of what we're involved in. But the CAS obviously is a key piece where we interface with the approved housing body sector. We have colleagues in the department in Wexford, in our Wexford office, who also work on the CAF scheme as well. So they're obviously, the scale of what's being delivered under CAF is obviously very considerable and a bigger segment of the activity from the AHB sector generally. But as Karen said, the CAS scheme is going quite a number of years, and it's something that we're keen to try and advance and nurture and find the best way forward for us. We have a budget, an annual budget. I think this year is at about 90 million, guys, isn't it? Around, yeah, 90 million is our annual budget. Now, just to be clear about this, the last few years we've been creeping up towards that. We've had between maybe going up from about 75 up to 80, 85, 90. We have not spent that in the last few years, right? We haven't reached the full level of spend. Now, that's not something I would lose sleep about personally. We don't, it's never a case that we get this budget and if we don't spend it, it goes back to the Exchequer or whatever. It would be redirected to other housing areas. So, it's not like the money goes unused. At the same time, we're trying to, I suppose, identify the scale of activity that CAS should be delivering and trying to get all ourselves, it's between budget and between activity and project advancement, get it all pointed in the right way towards achieving our targets and spending our full money. So clearly, if we're not hitting our full targets, which we don't really, and we're not spending our full budget, we have a bit of a way to go, which ideally we'd like to bridge that gap. To be fair, there's quite an amount of housing for people who would be ordinarily the primary categories for CAS, such as people with disability, elderly people. There's a lot of that housing now getting delivered under the CAF scheme. Again, the crucial thing there is that the housing is being delivered, and that's really important. The scheme that is being delivered through is less important. So that's why, as I said, we wouldn't lose huge amounts of sleep over the fact that CAS is not drawing down its full funding once the units are getting delivered is the most important thing. But at the same time, as I said earlier, we want to try and get CAS directed appropriately and get project activity geared up so that we are spending our money and hitting our targets. Just on the targets, we've had an annualised target to deliver since Rebuilding Ireland. The government's housing programme has been in place. We have an annualised target of 300 construction units to get every year, and that's really the critical area where we don't achieve the target. I suppose, were we getting towards 200 last year, Michael? I think. Yeah. So we were close enough last year, but we'd like to be up there. As I said, again, the critical thing is the units are being delivered. It's not like no units for those categories, no housing for those categories is being delivered. They are being delivered, but not so much under CAS. On the other hand, acquisitions under CAS have been quite strong. And I suppose there's a little bit of a prejudice I have to acknowledge in the department for understandable reasons. Certainly on the local authority side, we need to do more new construction and less acquisitions. We probably would have come into that with that bit of mindset as well relating to CAS. Geez, lads, can we not add more stock and build new rather than buying? I've sort of modified my attitude over the last couple of years when I've seen some of the CAS activity that's going on, where people are acquiring units that are there, they're within community settings, they're being adapted appropriately, and I think if that's what's being done more maybe than we anticipated, that's equally fine, to deliver houses through that means. Taking on a construction activity can be challenging, and unless you've got the means and the capacity to do it, it's not something to be rushed into. So we were a little bit, as I said, focused in on can we get more CAS construction and less of the acquisitions, so that we keep our balance of about 300 construction. And what were we, about 100 or something? 180. Yeah, I'm sorry, what was our acquisition target? 100, yeah. So we're definitely not doing the 300 construction, 100 acquisition. If anything, we're doing it the other way around. But it's not, as I said, it's not something that we're hugely bothered about. Last thing before I just go through the few topics that I'm going to cover here, last thing to mention before I get into those is I'm not going to cover sort of an A to Z or an ABC even of what CAS is. Many of you that would be in the room that I know would have heard us doing that or heard other people doing that, so I'm not going to cover that territory, but I would acknowledge that there might be people here in the audience who have not undertaken a CAS project before. So if that is the case, while I'm not going to cover it here, colleagues and myself from the department are available to talk to you if you wanted to have a conversation with us afterwards, just to get some of the basics about undertaking the CAS project and how you would go about it. And the principal thing in that would be your relationship and working with your relevant local authority. That would be an important thing to take forward. So we can talk to you in the margins if that's needed. So what I'm going to cover is the CAS approval process and the four-stage assessment arrangements that we have in the department for capital construction projects, and a 75-week program that we introduced about, was it over a year ago at this stage, I think? Yeah, April last year, to sort of guide us through that period of assessing a project and getting it advanced onto site. I'm going to cover development allowance for AHBs, which was subject of a circular in the last week or so, I think that went out, and also some guidance and that we're about to issue on housing for people with disability, where there's a number of topics where I think that circular we hope to have out. Maybe we were waiting for some HSE feedback on the last draft of the circular, and it's just going to cover some aspects of the housing for people with disability and how that should be approached, and the funding that might be available through the CAS scheme versus what the HSE might step in and fund as well. So something is about to issue on that, and I'll just walk through it briefly as topic 3. So the CAS approval process. The key thing about this is that there's an open arrangement for CAS. In other words, in previous years, there used to be a call for proposals under CAS. Something would issue on the 5th of May on a certain year, and we'd ask you to have all applications in by the 30th of June or the 30th of September, and then they'd be assessed and approved, or maybe not approved, or whatever. We stopped that back in 2017, and we've said it's an open process. You can come in at any time with an application, and we just think that's a more logical and open and better arrangement now. The process would involve the local authority, or the approved housing body, applying to the local authority with what's called the CAS 1 form, and we're about to revise that form and issue it. Just different issues come up depending on the type of delivery. If you're doing an acquisition or what we call a buy and renew unit, which would be remediating an empty or derelict unit, it's one type set of forms and one type of process. If you're doing a construction project, it's another. So I might cover a bit of that later on. Yeah, actually, here we are on the acquisition, and where you're doing an acquisition, maybe with upgrades or what we call a buy and renew. We'd be asking you we'd be emphasising to you to get realistic costs. To be honest with you, this is probably one of the recurring challenges we face with CAS projects. We have an awful lot of situations where a property maybe is going to be acquired. There's a fairly, nailed on figure for that. The upgrade costs, we appreciate, are challenging. How do you estimate that? What's your best way of doing that? What we would have a pattern of doing is seeing an estimated upgrade cost of 150 becomes 250, and maybe at the end of it all, it could be 400 or 500,000. And that's when you're just think of it. We try and think of things from your perspective and see if we can, rationalise what it is you're trying to do when you're bringing the project forward. I'm going to ask you to think of it from our perspective. We're civil servants. These things with figures jumping all over the place just wreck our heads. So it is a bit of a challenge, I suppose. And to be fair as well, we're all working under the Department of Public Expenditure Reform and the Public Spending Code and that. And the key thing about that is they look for cost certainty. They expect us to be bringing projects forward that are indicated at the beginning as, it's going to cost $500,000, and it doesn't become 950,000 6 months later. That's what wrecks their head and in turn puts the pressure on us. So whatever way it is to try and nail down realistic costs and the best, most accurate estimates would be a very important thing in undertaking an acquisition, especially where there are upgrades and maybe significant adaptations. Procurement of consultants and the development works and that for an acquisition in particular. Again, if it's public money, you have to do the procurement thing clean and transparent. That's always going to be the way. So what we'd emphasise to you there is just be clear and transparent about that. Undertake the procurement of whoever it is, if you've got an engineer, an architect, the same with contractors. Undertake that in line with the sort of common sense public procurement processes and have evidence of that. Just be able to show that you've done it and that you have got the best price and the best arrangement for those works. Avoid purchasing where major adaptations will be needed. Look, again, this is covered in the circular that we're going to be issuing in the next week or two. What we're asking you to do here, and again, we have architects in the Custom House and QS people in the Custom House who work with us, and this is one of the steers that they're coming back with. If you're purchasing a house that may be, for example, for people with mobility challenges, just really have a hard look at the property. If you're going to need, as the example there gives, if you're going to be looking at internal walls that you need wider corridors, whatever, you're really taking on a significant challenge and going into the unknown in terms of design and cost and works. If you're going to end up having bought a house, having to change significant internal layouts. So have a look at the house that you're buying and try and future-proof whatever your decisions or the needs might be of the people you're looking to accommodate. So that's just mostly, we're really looking for common sense there in terms of choosing the right property and the adaptation that will be needed. In relation to construction projects, we have a 4-stage approval process. Now, we tend to get a fairly bad rap on this all the time. I spent my morning there this morning answering press queries where people are coming in and saying, what's this 4-stage approval process? And it takes over a year, and so on and so on. The 4-stage approval process does not take over a year, says he, defending himself, but it doesn't. What takes a year, and this is for local authorities or for AHBs, whatever, in our experience, what takes over a year is just simply the process of moving a construction project forward from the beginning of the idea to procuring your consultants, to getting the design done, to looking for planning, to finalising your design, going out to tender. All of that is what takes over a year. Within that period, the department intervenes to look at different stages of the project advancement and check that and give an approval. And it does that 4 different times over the lifetime of that process. The department's timeline, we would ordinarily want and expect it to be sort of the range of 12 to 15 weeks out of what might be a 60-week period. But we also expect that 12 to 15 weeks to overlap with work that's going on at the same time anyway on advancing the project. So I think I'm going to cover actually the issue about the 75-week programme in a minute for CAS, but that the 4-stage process and approval arrangement applies when we're doing a construction project. Yeah, here it is, the 4-stage process in 75 weeks. 4 review points. What we ask you to do is, if you've got suppose you're doing a CAS construction project, send it into us in advance when you've got the idea, when you want to bring it forward. Well, this is a fairly light touch, fairly straightforward capital appraisal that we look for you. It should just state the basic business case that you're looking to do. You should be talking to the local authority about this, And that's the stage one. We then ask you to go out and do a bit more work on the design, prepare to go to planning. Pre-planning, send it in to us again with more detail now put on the idea. That's stage two. You then get your planning and you get prepared to go to tender. So now your design team is doing the full details on the project, you're ready to go to tender, send it in to us before you go to tender. That's stage three. And then you go to tender, you have your tenders back, you assess them, your QS, whatever you have one, goes through, recommends the contractor you want to employ. When you've got at that position and you're ready to go, send it into us again. That's stage four. So the stages at which the department looks to see the project would be natural stages where you'd be advancing the project against key milestones. Initial idea, pre-planning, pre-tender, post-tender. And they're the four stages. Now, we did something a while back with the local authorities where there was a huge level of variation with the local authorities. Some local authorities were getting through that process on their own projects that the local authorities are bringing forward for new social housing on their own sites and that. Some were getting through that process in about a year, some were getting through it in about 3 years. And there was a range of different reasons. And it's one of these things, you know, what gets measured gets done. We just knew from the whole process that we weren't doing well and we needed to start putting timelines against each of the stages I just described there. If you send it into us at stage one, initial proposal, and then you have to send something into it for stage two, pre-planning, what's a reasonable time for that? We were seeing a year or two going by and nothing coming back to us, having given initial approval. So now there's a defined set of weeks after stage one approval when a stage two must come in, after stage two approval when a stage three should come in. So we agreed with the local authority sector a 59-week timeline for them to have the initial project to getting on site, 59 weeks. With the CAS construction projects, we've mirrored that and we put it at 75 weeks. Why the extra weeks? Primarily because, number one, we're trying it out with CAS projects for the first time. Number two, there's an extra layer, I suppose, involved with CAS, and we wanted to recognise that, where the AHB sends a project to the local authority, and they look over it and might have a conversation with you. So just even recognising, adding, for example, an extra week or 2 weeks here and there for the local authority to handle the process, it ended up at 75 weeks. There's no way in our view that 75 weeks is the sort of expected time. If someone could turn around and say AHBs could generally deliver projects from the first idea, the first proposal to getting on site under a year, please fill your boots, go for it. We'd love that. But we're trying at the moment to work with a 75-week timeline. And the idea, one of the manifestations of that would be that if you send something in to us and we give an initial stage one approval, you should be getting, maybe you are, maybe you're seeing this already, and if you're not, I hope you will be soon. You should be getting a letter back saying, you're getting your stage one approval, and in the next sentence, you must have your stage two into us by this date. And the same with every other subsequent stage. We hadn't been doing that either with local authorities or with AHBs for CAS. We are now doing that. So just that idea of having a focus on a date and a target date, we think is very, very important. Okay, yeah, there you go. Bit of graphics. Okay, yeah, I went through some of this already. Stage one approval is initial design of the project, and it's accompanied by a CAS 1 form. We ask you to send us in a capital appraisal for the project, and there's guidance in a circular that the last CAS circular we issued in 2017, Appendix 5, gives you guidance on what to cover in a capital appraisal submission. So there's guidance, a bit of a ladybird approach there of what to cover, set out in one of the previously issued circulars. And the 75 weeks begins once the department has a valid application or the local authority has it. So in other words, if you send us in an idea, a project proposal, and straight away we see, right, you haven't covered half the basic points that we need, we'd send it back to you and ask, or we'd send it back via the local authority and ask that you would cover. For instance, if someone sent us in a project and there was no site map or details of the location, we didn't know where it was relevant to the town or services or whatever, we would send that back and ask for all of that to be filled in. So the 75-week clock would start once the department has a valid application. With the stage 1 budget, with the stage 1 approval, we would ask you then to go and procure a design team and brief them. We would give you a stage 1 budget. Now, that stage 1 budget, we try and say to you, here's a budget, we think it's realistic, try and stick with this. But we know when we give a stage 1 budget, there's loads of other stuff to go through, and that will develop as the project develops, and it could have an impact on costs. So we're never thoroughly expecting that every stage 1 budget will be still there at stage 4. So we're realistic about that. At the same time, I talked earlier about having realistic estimates of what you're going to encounter. It would look really bad and be very challenging for us if we had a project proposal that was 1.3 million at stage 1 and ended up, as I said earlier, about 2.8 million at the end of it. So try and do your best estimate of what it might be at stage 1 and work from that. There's guidance from the department in a document called Quality Housing for Sustainable Communities about the location and the services that would be expected for social housing. And some of those aspects would be maybe even more relevant for if it was special needs housing. If there are mobility issues, we'd probably be placing an even higher level of emphasis on proximity of the housing to services, the location and travel opportunities and that. And we'd tell you to consult with the local authority if necessary in relation to any of these aspects. Stage 2 means that we approve your initial designs, pre-planning. We'd expect your stage 2 submission to include site surveys and investigations, and we expect the local authority, the approved housing body to take 17 weeks to submit stage 2 to the local authority, and then there's 6 weeks for the response to that. So that's the sort of timeline. We would generally be, as I said earlier, be expecting that during that 6 weeks that the department or local authority might have the file that you'd be working on the next stage. So the overlapping element of that is very important. Stage 3 is where you come to us looking for sanction to go ahead and tender for the works. So we're looking there for a detailed design and a cost plan. We're asking you to maintain the cost control and avoid overspecing at that stage. That's sometimes where we would see a project growing arms and legs, cost escalating, and we'd be asking you to try and stay consistent all the way through the project. Again, the timeline for a stage 3 application is 20 weeks. We'd be looking for it to be submitted to us 20 weeks after the stage 2 approval has been given. And then stage 4 is us approving the project after you've gone to tender. We'd be asking you to demonstrate and be clear that you've undertaken the procurement of the developer in an open and transparent way. Again, we expect stage 4 to be 12 weeks after stage 3 approval. So just thinking about that, I said 20 weeks, I think, didn't I, for stage 2 to stage 3, because that's really where the hard work happens. You're doing the key design, you're putting all the details together to go to tender. That's where the heavy work is. Stage 4 is shorter, it's 12 weeks because you've gone to tender, and we expect what we're getting in from you is a good analysis of the tenders you received and your preferred option for the developer. And that should be less of a workload in assessing stage 4. At the moment, we do have a challenge. We're not that long into the use of the 75-week program. So I don't want to project this as being an issue, a challenge that we still have at the moment, or that even though we brought to 75 weeks, we're still getting the projects too slow. But I would say, and it is unquestionably the case, that for the last few years, we've had a real problem with CAS projects progressing very slowly through that process that I just described. So we're talking about a 59-week target time for local authorities, 75 weeks for AHBs. There would be CAS projects that have taken 4 years. And there definitely would be any amount of those projects that I could look at and I could say, yeah, I can see why. There's been numerous problems, the site issues, a range of other things. There's been other projects where I couldn't necessarily put those reasons behind why the project has taken so long. I've no problem about accepting there can be challenges in terms of just smaller AHBs and capacity and, you know, having expertise available. But it's not brilliant if we're taking, you know, 115 weeks to get on site, which is the average we're achieving, rather than 75 weeks target time now. So the 75-week programme puts an expectation on everyone to get the project at what we think is a reasonable speed. Again, if people can be undercutting that 75 weeks, that would be brilliant. And I think we talked to the Irish Council of Social Housing colleagues when we were putting the 75-week programme together, and I think one of the things we would have considered is, should we aim better, should we aim shorter? And our view was, when you looked at what we did for the local authorities, and you know what, how are they getting on? Local authorities are getting on not too bad against the 59-week time. I know there's some local authority colleagues here, and they might have their own views on that, but I think we're sort of coming in the low 60s at the moment, about, you know, 61, 62 weeks, where we're aiming for 59 weeks with the local authorities. So putting that concentration in terms of time has, I think, worked for the local authority sector. The 75-week programme, if we're hitting that instead of 115 weeks in a year's time, that would be great. If we're actually getting down to 65 weeks, even better. So we're up for a bit of stretching in the targets and improving in the targets if we can get it. Just a few examples of projects that we had. Here's one which was a 6-unit development in a major town. Stage 1 approved 3 weeks. We're now giving, so it took 3 weeks in reality, and our aim under the 75-week programme is 5 weeks. So this particular example of a project did better than the target time we've now set. Here's where it then got into a bit more difficulty. Stage 2, the target time is 19 weeks. This particular project took 43 weeks to come back with stage 2. The stage 2 approval is supposed to take 4 weeks. We, the department, and the local authority, but mainly the department, took 6 weeks, not 4. So we failed that as well. The stage 3 expected to submit it in 22 weeks, it took 23, so it was just a week overhang there. The department was supposed to take 4 weeks, or would be taking 4 weeks under the 75. The department came back in 3 weeks. And then the stage 4, we expect back in 13 weeks, it took 35 weeks. So those, I suppose, where the red text is probably where the drift happened in this particular project. So it's just an example, and what we're showing there is just ultimately the accumulation of that was 50 weeks beyond what our target time now is. So that's a year. So that's, I suppose, what we're trying to do with the 75-week programme, is to see, can we cut a year off that project from the original idea to getting on site. That's one example. There's another one in a small rural town. The previous one was a major town. Which one is Ballina, I wonder? Are we the small rural or the major town? I don't know. Anyway, this is a small rural town, and again, you can see again where the drift happened. The target time on the 75-week programme is to get stage 1 approved in 5 weeks. We, the department, took 7 weeks. Then the pressure will be on the approved housing body to come back in 19 weeks. With the stage 2, it took 110 weeks. And you can see then the rest. Stage 3 was another area when instead of taking 22 weeks, it took 23 weeks. In fairness, other stages where okay, stage 4 was 15 weeks instead of 13 weeks. So again, the number of weeks lost in that project relevant to the new 75-week timeline was 117 weeks. So they would be, to be fair, fairly typical examples of the projects that we've been working with over the last few years. It's not by any means the general behaviour, but the general experience, but it is not untypical of what we're encountering. And we just are hoping and trying to work with yourselves and with local authorities with the 75-week programme to shave considerable time off how long it'll take to get the projects on site. This is just an illustration of the time it takes the segments of the time that are involved in the project. The green elements of this chart is where the AHB is involved in the project. That's 51 weeks out of the 75 is where the AHB is working on the project, is bringing forward its designs, doing its procurements, etc. The department is involved in 17 weeks of that overall 75-week period, and the local authority is involved in 7 weeks of it. So while overall 75 weeks is a fair amount of time, and some people might be a bit, well, certainly I'll tell you, when we were doing the local authority thing at 59 weeks, the politicians had us mired about it. They wanted it under a year, and in fact if they could have got it for 6 months, they wanted that. But when we sat down with local authority colleagues and worked out how long, when you break the whole process down, how long it takes, we actually found that 59 weeks was the best that we could do, and we think 75 weeks is the best sort of realistic target for CAS projects. But as I said earlier, we can beat it. We're happy to do that. Circular 18 2019 gives guidance on both the 75-week programme and the 4-stage process. What circular is that, guys? Is that?
This is 75-week circular.
Oh, is it that issued earlier this year about the 75 weeks? Okay, yeah, right. Okay, and now, so that's that on a sort of walkthrough of the approval process, the advancement of CAS projects, the timelines and the different elements of the work. So the development allowance I wanted to mention, this is something that we just issued something in the last couple of weeks on, and there isn't a development allowance available under CAS for AHBs who are bringing forward CAS projects. And it's available to AHBs whether it's a construction project or an acquisition. It's a contribution towards the AHB's own admin and overhead costs in developing a project. It's given to you as part of the CAS loan, so we will give you the funding for the CAS, for all the CAS costs, and we will roll the admin overhead amount, the development allowance, in with that loan as well. But obviously the intention of it is that it's used for the purpose of supporting you in advancing the project. You claiming the development allowance, one of the forms, a CAS 4 form, will contain from now on a section for you to input your request for the development allowance. So it'll be there in the forms that you'd ordinarily be submitting under CAS, a segment for you to claim the development allowance. There's caps on the development allowance. It's either 1.5% of the net project costs, or a maximum of 127, or it could be the amount actually spent and certified by the AHB on the admin and overheads for the project. Now, what do I mean by that? The maximum you can get is 127, so you can claim up to that. If your 1.5% of your project is less than that, that's what you will get. We ask you on this CAS 4 form to tell us what you're claiming relating to the admin overhead of the cost. Now, suppose you were entitled to 50,000 euros, and for some reason you told us that your admin costs on this project were 30,000, we'll give you the 30,000. Now, I'm really struggling here to think why you'd be telling us that. You wouldn't be telling us that. You'd be looking for the 50,000. But that's the reality is, I suppose, in terms of public funding, we need to have something from you saying, we have expended this amount in advancing this project, and we're looking for it. And you need to sign that off and certify that. We need to have that from you, just part of government funding arrangements. So when you're signing that off, if you're entitled to 50,000 and you've expended that amount on it, then put that in. If you're going to, if you're overtaken by honesty, and you want to actually say, well, actually, we only spent 30,000, well, then fill that in, and that's what we'll give you. But I don't expect many 30,000s when 50,000 is on offer. That's just reality. But that's the way the development allowance works. So look, it's a valuable and important stream of admin funding for advancing CAS projects, and the forms will cover that as well. The last piece I'm going to cover is the guidance on housing for people with disability that we're going to issue a circular to you on. The aim of the circular is to give more clarity about this area on the sort of scale and type of projects that might arise for CAS. It's particular emphasis on housing for people with disability in the circular. It's sort of jointly scripted with the HSE. We've worked with the HSE on this, so the people involved in housing for people with disability, probably people in particular that we've had a relationship with the last couple of years in relation to decongregating a lot of the institutions. The people in the HSE we're dealing with there are the ones that we would primarily have worked with. And there's going to be revised CAS forms as well. We wanted to, the reasons why we wanted to issue the form was because we were finding, I mentioned earlier the idea of unsuitable acquisitions with very high costs, maybe overspec leading to high costs and leading to project delays as well. We wanted to sort of address some of those issues. Now, I'm not saying that what we're going to do in the sector is going to suddenly reveal light to everyone and you're going to be absolutely clear what to do with every project. Every project is going to be different, and what you do in terms of making a judgment call, is this the right house to buy for the particular people we want to deliver the housing for? Is the adaptation, is the adaptability of this property something that's there for us, or is it going to cost so much that we should walk away from this property? There'll be judgment calls you'll have to make on a continuous basis with every project you're undertaking. But we're trying to just give some guidance on certainly the department's thinking and the sort of shared thinking we have with the HSE regarding that. And I referenced earlier about the idea of acquiring a property where you might want to do really significant internal adaptations and moving walls and that. You really need to question whether that's realistic to do or not. So that's what we're trying to address in terms of giving guidance on this, and that you would ask you to just think long and hard about the property that you might be acquiring if that's what you're doing. So the circular is intended to give you greater clarity on that. I would just acknowledge in finishing that this particular area, particularly in noticing this trend, and I think, I'm not saying it's the sole area where we've seen it, but we've definitely seen it in terms of AHBs who are trying to support people moving from congregated settings. What I would understand from talking to a good few of you is that you'll be looking for a particular property and you'd have a very precise criteria you'd be trying to fulfill in terms of location, the suitability of property, and all of that. So we get that you're really shopping in a shallow pool of what's available. Sometimes the type of properties, if you're looking, for example, for a detached bungalow, very often in a lot of areas, they don't come cheap. So we get that as well. And yet then, having got that property, which might be, you might think it's brilliant price, we've got this property, they're not very readily available, so this is brilliant. You then are looking at maybe significant adaptations. So we get all of that, and we want to work with you on all of that to try and improve our reaction to your proposals. But we'd also be asking you just to, as I said earlier, to think strongly every time you're going into one of these projects, because I could list off quite a few examples of projects that were in the realm of maybe 400,000 and ended up in the realm of 800,000. And that would be not uncommon for us to encounter. If the reality of these projects is that you will not get much change out of $750,000, especially say in the Greater Dublin area, for a project like that, well then we need just to get ourselves all on the same page on that. We need to realise it's going to cost a lot to buy the precise type of property, it's going to cost a lot to adapt it. And I would have to say in the department, and especially our architects and the QSs, we probably have a bit of learning to do to understand the type of scenarios you're trying to address, the needs of the clients you're trying to cater for, the adaptations that are needed, what the OT might be specifying, and so on and so on. We have a bit of a journey there still, I would have to say, to go to understand all of that and the challenges. But we will be asking you in terms of playing your part to try and just bear in mind, as I said earlier, you're dealing with a department with a limited, I mentioned earlier, you know, we're not spending our full CAS, but the way to spend our full CAS is not to take projects that we might be budgeting 500,000 for, start spending 1 million on them just because we have the funding. We're never going to get away with that. There's always going to be focus on value for money on every individual project. So, so we're really asking you to look at those projects, and you know, if there's learning in terms of, as I said, what we need to learn from you or what you need to learn from us, we'll all get better at it, but that's the sort of focus. And ultimately, it's about trying to steer the right way forward so that these units are being delivered for the people who need them. There's been some really poor examples, and there still are examples going on. I was only dealing with one this morning where a house might have been bought, people might have been intended to move into that house who really significantly need to get into that house, and a year later we're still faffing about trying to figure out the costs, and maybe those people are not even have to be moved elsewhere, and that's just not good. So we need a better outcome for that.